BuzzCity is here today at the McIntyre Gallery with featured artist Marsha Delouchery. And Marsha, you've got an exhibit, a show coming up early in April here.
That's right.
And the subject matter is, I guess, the Fort Walsh area and the Northwest Mounted Police from the early years.
Yeah, I became very interested in that whole period of history here in Saskatchewan when it wasn't Saskatchewan yet. But anyway, the first European settlements had already arrived here, and there was a lot of problematic things going on with trading, whiskey trading, and law and order didn't exist, basically. But that happened to draw a lot of people to the West for opportunities during that time. Anyway, that was chronicled in many different books, that period of history, and it's fascinating. But what I got off on a tangent because of the actual uniforms that the Northwest Mounted Police were given to wear, the garments they were issued in their mess kits, were absurdly inadequate for the job. And they kept changing. They changed very quickly in style. And anyway, I got off on a tangent of looking at those articles of clothing that they were asked to wear, redcoats. And this exhibition is largely about that, examining those garments. Yeah.
And for those who may not be familiar with them, the original uniforms were modeled on the British Army uniforms of the day.
Yeah.
I think the era is around 1875 that we're referencing.
Well, the force was formed in 1873, and by order of John MacDonald's government at the time. But they had to get uniforms, so they were issued and they were made in England based on the military uniforms that were in existence. Anyway, they were red, they were beautifully sewn, but they were highly inadequate for the job here in Saskatchewan. So, I mean, a typical constable would be out on patrol and riding and would sleep on the ground at night. And it's kind of hard on a red wool coat. And their silly little pillbox hats didn't protect them from sun or anything else. So again, those early uniforms didn't last long. They quickly adapted to much more practical uniforms. Yeah.
Well, winter attire too would have of necessity been sort of not uniform issue, I'm sure.
Yeah.
The buffalo coats must have come in fairly quickly.
Well, you know, James Walsh, who you're familiar with, James Walsh has been photographed many times wearing buckskins and a large Stetson up on one side. He was quite flamboyant, and he was a very smart man, and he allowed himself to wear much more practical clothing, as I'm sure all of them did, especially when winter came. It was very harsh conditions here. Yeah.
Another of your influences is Wallace Stegner, and I understand you've been the artist in residence in his home in East End.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
What a privilege! What a privilege to be there. You know, I think it's the East End Arts Council have a committee who just do nothing but make sure that house is preserved and saved for artists to go there and as like a retreat, really. And often it was writers that they invited to go there. Of course, Walsh Stegner being a writer, but they do make exceptions. They've had different musicians stay there, and myself as a painter. So using East End as a home base and being in that mystical house was just a incredible experience. And from there I could take day trips and go to Fort Walsh, and I want Chimney Coulee, and all the places that Wallace Stegner named in his book Wolf Willow as being important to him as a child there, but also historically. I mean, he looked at the history of that area, a history he never knew about when he was there. In fact, in school, he would be learning about the history of England, when right around him was an amazing movement of native people and European settlement and bloodshed and politics and everything else was going on, but they knew nothing of it. They were just trying to survive as farmers when he was a kid. But his book, anyway, opened a door for me. It opened a door of learning about the early settlement in Saskatchewan, and also about the period of history that Stegner talks about in Wolf Willow is a 30 or 40 year period, right through the Riel Rebellion and onwards. Yeah. He returned there as a 50-year-old man to look at that life he had as a child. So it's a memoir. It's partly a memoir. It's a fascinating book.
And he had lived a long time in the United States, I think, at that point, had he not?
Yes. His family, he was a 12-year-old boy when his family pulled up stakes and called it quits. And in those days, and the book documents this, like famine, drought, hoppers, floods, everything imaginable. They just had year after year after year of bad luck. It wasn't not a get-rich-quick scheme. It was devastating.
And that sort of dovetails with the experience of the Northwest Mounted Police, too, in that their attire, their uniforms was impractical for this country. And just as Stegner's experience of the land and times that he lived in sort of flies in the face of the myth of the cowboy and the Hollywood sort of portrayal of cowboys and ranching, is really in no way akin to the actual experience of doing this, that it was a rough, hard life.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Very, very much so. And in that area, it was cattle was the mainstay, and but Walsh Stegner's family actually were trying to grow cereal crops, and he describes a year where, oh, the rains came. It was like we'd been saved. The rain there was so much rain. Him and his brother couldn't even catch any gophers. They'd all been drowned by this floods and floods of rain. But the wheat was 6 feet tall, except it was full of rust. Mm-hmm. And it was another year of no crop. It's just unbelievable what they experienced trying to make a go of it as farmers. But they were an example of many families who came into Canada from the States. He was 5 when his father came up here and homesteaded. They came up here because the Northwest Mounted Police represented law and order. And it drew a lot of Americans northward from the Blue Coat region south of the Medicine Line up here in the Great Mother Country. So yeah, there was the RCMP, or the Northwest Mounted Police, did represent law and order, and that was some kind of comfort zone, because the American West was pretty wild indeed. You know, wild.
As I understand it, the history of the two countries is that the frontier preceded law and order in the United States, and law and order preceded anything else in Canada. We seem to have learned from their mistakes.
Very much so, I think, yeah. And there were some pivotal people to enforce that, and James Walsh being one of them, he was brave, and he was determined, and he was there to help all the people who were here, whether they were native or they were Europeans. His job was to provide security and safety for everyone. It's kind of neat because, I mean, the RCMP, their mottos hold fast till today. You know, what they were created to do and what they continue to do. Interesting history. So yeah, the book Wolf Willow was totally a Bible for me, and this is the tip of the show is the tip of the iceberg, because there's vast more things that must be painted. So I'm looking forward to the next phase of that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. When we look at the works that you've done, you profile a lot of the garments and a few of the characters from that era. Mm-hmm. Are these historic characters?
For sure. A painting that's really my next step probably is the painting of Marmaduke Greyburn. And Marmaduke Greyburn was 19 years old. He had enlisted into the Northwest Mounted Police. He came from Ontario. He was going from Fort Walsh back into the Cypress Hills to pick up his axe, which he had left behind. He was followed by 2 barefoot ponies, and the RCMP, they have shod horses, but the ponies that followed him didn't, and he was killed. His horse was stolen, and later they sent trackers out to find the guy, and they found his little hat, and then they found him. He had been killed, And he was the first member of the Northwest Mounted Police to ever lose his life in the line of duty. And his story fascinated me, as it did Wallace Stegner, who told me that story in Wolf Willow, about a pointless loss of life. And it's true. But they actually named a coulee, the Greyburn Coulee in that area, after Marmaduke Greyburn. But anyway, many officers in the Northwest Mounted Police subsequently did lose their life, but he happened to be the first one. Yeah. So yeah, there's representation in a lot of these of particular people, but no, some of them are just no one in particular. You know, I'm more interested in. There's a painting also of a woman standing looking out over the horizon, and of course that was Mrs. Stegner. Wallace Stegner's mother was my inspiration for that painting, but she became to me to embody all pioneer women. You know, she could be anybody, but putting up with what they put up with. Amazing stories. Yeah, too bad she wasn't a writer, Mrs. Stegner. Anyway, Wallace in a lot of ways, I think, referred to her many times, and she was quite an astounding person. Anyway, so we learn about her a little bit in his book.
Well, that's a very prominent theme, that you know, the hardship aspect of life out here, the reality versus expectations, the advertising in Britain and perhaps in Eastern Canada wasn't what we would call accurate today. You know, this country was described as being in the same latitude as Plymouth, England, but yes, it was. But they didn't. They neglected to mention that the climate wasn't quite the same, right? And I think when you're confronted with the vastness of the prairies, the distances, the extreme harsh climate, it must have been a huge shock for people who came from even as close as Ontario and were unprepared, totally unprepared for what they encountered here. So I sort of see that imposition of accepted standards in your work on your prairie landscape, you know, your preoccupation with the uniforms, for example, which were eminently impractical for this region, regardless of season.
Yeah, that's right.
Is that one of the reasons you chose that subject matter?
Well, just a general interest in historical things, artifacts, and in this case, extant garments generally. It was interesting. But I don't know, I had to start somewhere. And I wanted to bring in the sense of I guess I do romanticize that era, but the veils of mystery and myth, and veils of history and veils of time came into play with the style that I paint them in. A lot of washes of color, and give it some depth and some mystery to it, you know. So that plays in it. I have to be careful I don't let the story dominate. It's not an illustration. It needs to be a great painting. So I can't let the narrative control it. I have to let the artist and the painting part of it be really my message, or that's it. The painting is my message. The painting is what I do. So, because Wallace Stegner already wrote the book, so that's a lot. I'm illustrating Wolf Willow.
Are you?
I'm illustrating. That's what I'm doing. But yeah, it's the painting, the style of the work, and the additions I make to it of blurriness and mystery. That's what I'm trying to achieve with this particular series for now. Anyway, yeah.